So ever since Andor released, people have been absolutely praising the show and saying that it's the best Star Wars show since The Mandalorian, or even since Disney purchased the franchise. But did you realize that the creators of Andor actually Jedi mind tricked you into liking this show so much? And they did this by using some of the oldest filmmaking techniques and tricks in the book. And today I'm going to be explaining exactly how they did it. What's up guys, my name is Mike and I'm the Weird Pigeon of Weird Pigeon Productions. And today we're going to be talking about the cinematography of Andor and how its art of filmmaking has really set it apart and made it such a huge success in the eyes of so many fans. Also, really quick, I want to say there will be some pretty major spoilers for Andor, so if you haven't seen it yet, I highly recommend you check out that show. Cinematography is literally just the art of filmmaking. The camera movement, angles, shot composition, lighting, sound design, editing, music, all of this stuff combines together to create cinematography. And probably the number one thing that I feel like sets this show apart from what we've been seeing in Star Wars lately is the way that they use the camera itself to tell the story. And a really good example of how the camera has been used to tell the story in this show is during the meeting between Luthen Rael and Andor in episode 3. To truly explain how this was so well done and executed, I need to explain a little bit of a rule in filmmaking, so just bear with me for a second. There's something in filmmaking called the 180 rule. The way this works is that when you're having a conversation in a film between two or more characters, what you want to do is almost like draw an invisible line between the two, and you can only set your camera on one side of that line in the scene. If you cut to the opposite side, depending on the circumstances, it can feel very jarring and disorienting to the viewer. And sometimes filmmakers use that jarring and disorienting effect to further the story. Some great examples of this is the final shootout in the Sergio Leone movie, Once Upon a Time in the West, where at the very end of the duel, the camera shifts to the opposite side of the 180 line when our hero is triumphant over the villain. We also see this effect used in the Dark Knight trilogy during the scene where Batman and the Joker are talking to each other in the interrogation room. When the Joker gains the upper hand in the conversation on Batman, we see the camera shift to the opposite side of the 180 line. We also see this used in Andor, where the camera fluidly moves from one side of the line to the other, really without breaking it or feeling disorienting, but it does show that there is a change in the conversation. And they do this at the perfect moment. It's when we start to realize the reason that Luthen is there speaking with Andor isn't for the thing that Andor stole. He's there for Andor himself. Luthen wants to defeat the Empire, and he requires people like Andor to really make his dream become a reality. And this is cinematography used at its finest. It's there to help build up the story. It's there to support the story. And it's these subconscious little things that all add up into making a film and a show so impactful to its audience. You don't even realize it's happening, but it's happening. Other Star Wars shows have tried to do this, but I feel like to a lesser degree. In Kenobi, we see a conversation between Obi-Wan and a former Jedi who's on the run asking for his help, and Obi-Wan turns him down. We can tell there's confliction in Obi-Wan, and I feel like they try to convey this by using a very shaky camera to show the kind of unsettling feeling that Obi-Wan is feeling right now. But to me, it just felt really disorienting and jarring. The camera didn't need to be shaking like this, and it kind of put me out of the scene. And I think the reason why Andor is doing such a great job is because these things are so subtle. It's not as in your face. Another really subtle improvement that Andor has made over previous Star Wars shows is its use of flashbacks. The transitions in this show and the editing is just seamless. And this is perfectly represented in the transition between the beginning of the show and the first flashback, where we get the little droid B coming up to Andor to wake him up. And he starts using his original name. And it immediately cuts to Andor waking up as a kid, with his sister saying that exact same name. We get a shot of B, again the droid, just strolling on through town, and then something covers the frame, and immediately we get a shot of the door opening and B's coming through, kind of matching those two shots together. This is a very subtle change in how flashbacks are handled in Star Wars compared to the Book of Boba Fett, where every time we were going to be seeing a flashback, we knew it was coming because we'd see Boba Fett in his Bacta chamber. And by doing this, it kind of slowed down the pacing of the Book of Boba Fett. You couldn't just have a flashback. You had to show him in the Bacta tank. And by doing this, they also had to build in a reason for him to have these flashbacks in the script, and that was just the fact that, oh, whenever you're in a bacta tank, it looks like you just have visions. And to me, that didn't exactly make sense. I feel like the way they're doing this in Andor just flows a lot better and doesn't require some wonky explanation. The music for Andor is absolutely exceptional. And what I love about this show is how they've used the music to emphasize the locations that the characters are in. When we see the planet Morlana 1, we get this like synthy techno sort of sound. In the flashbacks when we're on Kenari, it's a very different sound. It's more tribal. The instruments used are primitive. Through the audio, we can hear that this is a very different planet. These people are very different. Even Ferrix has its own unique sound. It sounds more normal for Star Wars. And that's because this planet is full of normal people in the Star Wars universe. All the special effects in this show are perfect. That's one thing a lot of people didn't really like about Obi-Wan. They felt like the special effects weren't fully done. And for this show, they never actually used the volume, and instead used just conventional means of filmmaking, which to me is a little refreshing. And if you don't know exactly what I'm talking about, I'll be making a video talking about the volume, how Disney Star Wars shows have used it to success and sometimes to its detriment. The final piece of the cinematography pie I want to talk about is lighting. And they went with a different approach to lighting. Instead of going with a very stylized, story-driven lighting style like what we see a lot of times in movies like John Wick, they went with a very natural realism style, which I think was necessary in many ways because Star Wars is of course a fictional universe, and if your lighting doesn't look real, the setting won't look real, it'll look fake. But what makes the lighting in this show so incredible is how they've actually built all of their lights into the sets. The lighting that they use for the scenes in Andor are practical. They're there. You can see the lights they use. You can see where the sources are coming from. And although I'm sure they did use some studio lights to motivate the light that we see in the scenes, it doesn't look like they really would have needed to. And this isn't a new technique for Star Wars. This is something they've been doing since the very, very beginning. A lot of the Death Star scenes with the Death Star hallways have those iconic light panels on the walls. And they put those there because the Death Star walls were gray, they were dark and kind of boring. And the filmmakers needed something to bring more interest to the space, but also to bring the exposure up and add a little bit of contrast on the actors in the scene. Some examples of this incredible use of lighting is a scene in the Pre-Mor Authority headquarters office. We've got an overhead soft light key lighting them, which looks really pleasing and natural. Then we've got a lot of backlight coming through the window, which again is very pleasing to the eye and totally natural. And they also have a lamp on in the corner that's blasting light up into the corner of the ceiling. And this is being used to bring up the ambience in the room just a little bit more and also add a little bit of fill on the darker side of their face so it's not too contrasting, doesn't look too unrealistic. I'm actually doing that right now for this lighting setup. I've got a light here in the corner blasting light into the corner of the room just to bring the ambience in the room up a little bit and not make it look as contrasty. And this is what it looks like with that light there in the corner off. It's a little too contrasty for what I'm talking about. Now the final thing I want to talk about is how all of these different techniques combine together and how this show really uses the visuals to not only emphasize the story, but tell its own story in a way. At the very beginning of the show, Andor goes to Morlana 1 to look for his sister. And while he's looking for her, he runs into two corporate security guards who shake him down, and he ends up accidentally killing one of them. And then in cold blood, he kills the other one who was defenseless and pleading for his life. In Rogue One, we see a very similar scene at the very introduction of Andor as a character. He's a spy for the rebellion, and he's going to speak to an informant in a seedy spaceport. And when they're discovered by stormtroopers, he kills his informant to keep him quiet. At the beginning of Andor, he's killing to save himself, to survive. At the beginning of Rogue One, he's killing for a greater purpose, for the rebellion. But later on in Rogue One, we see he is told to assassinate Jyn Erso's father, and even though he almost pulls that trigger, he decides not to do it because it's not the right thing. This shows a clear change in Andor as a person visually through cinematography. At the very end of Rogue One, during the closing of the final chapter of Andor's life, he's looking off into the sunset with Jyn Erso. And really, it's not a sunset, it's a blast from the Death Star coming to kill him and everyone in his area. But nonetheless, he's really looking off into a sunset or sunrise. We see this again in Andor. During the closing of that first chapter of his life when he's a kid, when he's flying off his homeworld with Marva, he's looking off into a sunset or sunrise. And then later on in his life, as he's leaving Ferrix, which for the longest time has been his new home, the closing of another major chapter in his life, he's looking off into the sunset or sunrise as he flies off with Luthen Rael to potentially start the rebellion. Without using words or dialogues, and by using cinematography, we're seeing changes in the story. We're seeing chapters of Andor's life opening and closing. And this, guys, is cinematography at its finest. It's what I love to see as a filmmaker. And it's the subconscious reason so many Star Wars fans love this show. It's how the filmmakers have Jedi mind tricked you into liking this show so much by incorporating all these subtle details you probably didn't pick up on, but all add to make the story stronger and feel more real. So guys, what did you think of Andor? Were there any other cinematic techniques that you picked up on that I might have missed? So please let me know in the comments down below. And at the end of the show, if you guys really enjoyed this video, I'm thinking about making another one talking about the cinematography in the show overall. So guys, if you enjoyed this video, please leave a like, subscribe, and I will see you all in the next one. Bye.